Hello and welcome to the Armchair QBs. I'm your host Calum Buchan and I'm joined once again by Dan Cameron. So we've now reached the final episode in our previews. We're going to be previewing the NFC East and the AFC East. Before we get to that, there wasn't a lot of news in the NFL this week, but the one big thing that did happen was Earl Thomas was released by the Ravens, which kind of came a bit out of the blue after the fight in practice, but it is unusual to see two teammates fighting. Dan, this is your team. What did you make of the whole ordeal?
I don't think it's unusual to have teammates fighting. I mean, on the same side of the ball, probably, maybe a little bit, but certainly the fact that it went to blows probably was the last straw. It's not really come out of the blue, even when he had the difficulty with his brother, and that's all I'm going to mention it as, and his wife. There was mentions as to whether or not the Ravens were going to look at that to see if they could get rid of him. There has been, now that he's been released, there's been reports come out that he was less than exemplary teammate. He was a bit too big for his boots and was really kind of bringing the atmosphere and the culture down, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And actually, players went to the coaching staff and said, this can't continue. And so thereafter, they had the fight. He releases, a kind of mini statement trying to defend himself on Instagram, and then they just released him straight away. So it just became too much of an issue, and it was all about culture for the Ravens, which is, really important. That's why they get to where they are. And it's one of these things where, for a team like the Ravens, the Patriots, the Seahawks, sometimes it's just too difficult to keep a star player in line. And so it now makes a little bit more sense when you had the contract dispute with Seattle and Earl Thomas sticking the finger up at Pete Carroll as he broke his leg when in his last season at Seattle. And so when you're part of a good unit like Legion of Boom and Richard Sherman, again, who can be a little bit abrasive, sometimes the production and the value of those people outweigh the difficulties that come with it. And when you're Earl Thomas off a leg break and you're not quite Earl Thomas anymore, still doing very well, you think he isn't, and maybe you'll say why, but it just became too much, and it makes me laugh as to why to think that Antonio Brown has been a destination for the Ravens has been mooted. You would think the Ravens might be able to hold it on, but this is a clear example that if you come in and you act up in the Ravens organization, they're not going to stand for it. So they're going to go after, not going to go after his money, they're going to go to arbitration to say that they shouldn't have to pay any money because of his actions. So it's a sad situation for all, especially seeing as he is a good football player, but perhaps less than a desirable character around the facility at the moment.
Yeah, I just think this year you could kind of see it coming because his play didn't really live up to that level of behaviour and that level of attitude. If you look at his PFF grades for last season, he came out at 76.9, which is average, which dropped from 90.2 his full season in 2017. Obviously, 2018 he had the broken leg, so he didn't really get a full season in. But you can see that his play had dropped off.
Right, I'm going to disagree with the fact that it dropped off. Okay, the grades for PFF are all well and good, but I think also the same, statistical service PFF will say that, per coverage snap, it was 0.17 yard per coverage snap. That's not bad for, a safety that has to now play closer to the line of scrimmage. He wasn't playing in the same system that he was in Seattle. He was playing closer to the line of scrimmage. I'm pretty sure that he'd been sent on more blitzes in his entire season in Baltimore than he had in his whole career. So it's a little bit different. I think he was still serving a pretty valuable role in the Ravens defense, but was he the kind of, that center fielder for the Seahawks? No, he wasn't. But, 76, is an average safety grade for PFF as far as I understand it. But I don't think you say that he was no longer Earl Thomas.
I think you could make I understand where you're coming from, but I think if you look at where his play was to go down to an average player, it's more of a drop off. You kind of notice it a little bit more when you're playing at such an elite level. But to your point, he was being used a lot in a lot of different positions compared with how he was used with the Seahawks. He had 264 snaps in the box last year. He took 63 in what is essentially a D-line position. So he was asked to do a lot more. Maybe he's better just being in that kind of high safety look. But it'll be interesting to see where he goes because it seems like the Cowboys have pulled out of wanting him. The Texans were rumored, but Kenny Stills kind of came out and said that they were fine without him. The reports did come out about him not showing up to a walkthrough because he had to get his car cleaned. So there's whole loads of attitude problems, which
and that goes.
I think that's what the main driving factor behind this.
Yeah, but I mean that goes back again to you're talking about is dropped off. He's played in the same system in Seattle for 7-8 years, and then he comes to a totally different system in Baltimore. He perhaps isn't as attentive to detail, and he probably has to learn a hell of a lot more in Wink Martindale's system than he ever had to do in Pete Carroll's system. We've talked about it when we focus specifically on the Legion of Boom. It's relatively simplistic defense, that cover three defense that Carroll runs. And so the variation when you come down into the Baltimore scheme is much more. And if he wasn't paying attention, skipping meetings and just saying, look, I'm Earl Thomas, bitch, I can do what I want. So they probably simplified things for him, and that's why he was sent so much and put down close to the line of scrimmage to try and avoid that difficulty with them. In relation to where he goes, I've muted Atlanta in our private conversations mainly because of the Dan Quinn connection and the possibility that their secondary could do with an Earl Thomas at the moment. Dallas, they freed up space with restructuring Tyron Smith's contract and such like, and they've got it there. And any team that signs him would most probably, I would say, take it on a 2-year deal with a 1 year and an option for a second, and they'd only have to pay him maybe about $6-7 million this year to get him in. So the Browns have also had it mooted that they would take a flyer on him. So Atlanta or Cleveland is somewhere that I would keep an eye on.
If you add him to that locker room, that in Cleveland, that is a ticking time bomb.
That might be, but they've got a need. Grant Delpit just tore his Achilles and is out for the year, so they've got a need. And as we've actually probably going to say, the Browns and their new GM and it's either Andy or Andrew Berry. I'm not sure I'm not on first name terms with him, but he is known as a bit of a collector and taking opportunities to bring people into the organization that might not be there, and he's done that with a rookie from Miami who they waived and tried to sneak onto injured reserve. So I think sometimes, an injury will force a person's hand, certainly for 1 year.
Yeah, it could just be a 1 year flyer, but I just think putting him in Cleveland, that's already a bit of a one to watch for me, for one that could go south. So I think adding in Earl Thomas, I'll just sit back and watch that and with interest if that happens.
I think it's got to be somewhere where he has a certain level of familiarity, because we're now 17, maybe 16 days away by the time this pod goes out from the first game. And so you need, if you are going to bring him in, you want to get him up to speed very, very quickly. I doubt he will not be signed by somebody this year, just because regardless of whether you say that his play's dropped off or not, Earl Thomas is probably better than some of the other players that are currently in starting spots around the league.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But again, I think it's just getting them into the right system. Atlanta probably, like you say, makes the most sense just from familiarity with Quinn. But we'll see what happens in the coming days. Let's go into the meat of the episode then. we're looking at the NFC and AFC Easts this week. I'll start off with the Super Bowl odds for all 8 teams. We've got the Patriots 16-1, the Bills are 20-1, Cowboys are 16-1, Eagles 20-1, Giants 80-1, Dolphins 75-1, Jets 70-1, and Washington football team are 125-1. That was the latest odds as of today. I quite like Patriots 16-1. I guess the noises are starting to come out about Cam, and they seem to be quite positive from camp. I don't know if that's just giving everybody, some optimism there, but I did find that to be quite short odds. I don't know, what are your thoughts on this, Dan?
I wouldn't touch that with a barge pole. I'm going to echo what Dave said last year, that your Super Bowl odds are fine if it's your team and you want to stick a tenner on it. But pre-season, I wouldn't really be keen on that. But 16-1 does seem a bit short. It should be at least double that as far as I'm concerned, given the turnover on the roster, the opt-outs, and where they are. So for the Patriots, that's ridiculous. What was Dallas again?
Dallas are 16.
Yeah, that's still probably just a bit too short.
Yeah, that's what. But then Dallas is a big public team, so those odds are getting bet down. You'll always get shorter odds on Dallas and Green Bay, and the likes, just because it doesn't necessarily reflect their actual position. It's just they're well-known teams, so they'll always take a lot of money on them. Let's go off into the NFC East. Just to recap from last year, Philadelphia topped the division at 9-7. Cowboys finished 8-8. New York Giants were 4-12. Washington Redskins were 3-13. And Philadelphia were the lone team in the playoffs. They got knocked out by the Seattle Seahawks in the wild card round. So during the offseason, this division's actually gone through a lot of change. We've got 3 new coaches in. Dallas, obviously, Mike McCarthy. Washington changed their name as well to Washington Football Team. They have Ron Rivera in. And then we've got Joe Judge in with the Giants. Where do you want to start with this one, Dan?
Let's start with Dallas.
Okay. Mike McCarthy coming in. He's kept Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator. McCarthy, when he left Green Bay, there was a lot of questions about his offense and how stale it had gone. He had that year off, and there was a lot of talk about him saying that he'd gone off and he'd learned and he was ready to adapt now. What are you thinking for Dallas this year?
I'll caveat every single team we talk about today, I think, pretty much with that there are offensive line questions, and it's all going to come down to coaching. That will apply to pretty much every single team, and Dallas is no exception. And you're right, it's the Mick McCarthy reclamation project currently as it is. Now, we've talked about how his time in Green Bay ended with Aaron Rodgers, and to say that it was stale was... It is on Mick McCarthy for not recognising it soon enough and perhaps not changing it enough, and that's why he went off and had this public tour with Peter King articles and making sure everybody knows he's going to the offices of PFF. And I tell you what, if Mick McCarthy fails, PFF are going to be beside themselves, because at the moment there's nobody propping up Dallas more than PFF, because it's well publicised that Mick McCarthy came into their offices with people that a group of people that he trusts. And try to learn from them, and they're hoping that their insight is going to be shown in application in Dallas's play, and they'll be able to charge double of what they used to. But back to the point about McCarthy getting stale. Sometimes that has to be a little bit on Rodgers, because I feel as though when Rodgers was not wanting to run new stuff. Especially, he got some concepts that he was, particularly fond of and didn't particularly want to change that. And it just struck me sometimes that Rodgers, because he is that prickly, would be more inclined to, purposefully not execute well on new stuff and just, keep the stuff that he was familiar with. So I don't know. We're going to see how much of that is really kind of, on Mick McCarthy. But as you're right, he's kept Kellen Moore, which is interesting because Dallas's offense was, doing well in the opening part of the season last year, and then they got incredibly conservative, and we've both placed the fault of that at Jason Garrett. So, he's currently not got play calling duties, as we're aware, and so it's going to be interesting to see that if that starts, if they kind of only are 2-2 after the first 4 games, does he take that back? So Dallas certainly on the offensive side are going to be interesting, but I tell you what, their defense is probably. Their defensive line is one of the best defensive lines in the 8 teams that we're going to talk about today. And if Mike Nolan can get them going, I've got Dallas is getting to the NFC Championship game.
Really?
Yeah, I think Saints Cowboys is what I'm thinking about the NFC Championship game right now.
It's just something that you said there kind of stood out to me. If they're starting 2-2, does he take over play calling duties? Because they start with the Rams, then they've got the Falcons, Seahawks, and Browns. Now, I'm not too high on the Rams, but Sunday Night Football to start the season, and opening up that new stadium, granted no fans in it, does it give the Rams a bit of an edge? I'm not sure, but there could be a scenario where they do start 2-2 there, or it's an interesting schedule, quite tough.
Well, I take it. You're really wanting to see how they perform against the Seahawks and the Rams, because you would expect of all the rosters we're going to talk about, Dallas has got the best roster, so we would expect them to be able to deal handily enough with the Browns and the Falcons on paper. So it's really a case of how they do against the Rams and the Seahawks, and if they manage to get a win out of that 3-1, I think they'd be pretty happy with that first quarter of the season.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. I do think they have the potential to be there. I'm interested to see the development of Dak under a new head coach. I think there's been a lot of questions about Dak, maybe unfairly. I think he's a pretty serviceable quarterback, maybe a high upside Kirk Cousins. I would say he's not an elite one, but I think
that's what we said. That's what we said when we covered him, and we showed the stats. What is he? And he's pretty much comparable to Kirk Cousins. And until he does anything other than that, I'm not gonna push him forward to say that he should be getting whatever tier we're talking about underneath Mahomes' money that he and his agent are trying to get. Actually, his agent got fired. I'm pretty sure. I think Todd France got fired because he wasn't able to get a deal done. So there's going to be a new agent dealing with that contract negotiation. But Dak, if he continues in the vein that he did in the early part of the season last year, then we can expect Dak to be getting all pro kind of, consideration, Pro Bowl, but he needs to get into the playoffs and he needs to win. Okay, they need to win a playoff game. And get to the NFC Championship game, and it's just the roster. It's the defense that I'm considering because I think at every single spot on this team, other than the offensive line, you're pretty happy with the people that you've got. And the only reason we're talking about the difficulties of the offensive line is really because Travis Frederick's left. He retired because of Guillain-Barré syndrome, and the interior is really the question as to whether or not Connor Williams elevates his play, and the center Joe Looney. That's it. Joe Looney is able to take over that center spot and really solidify it. So there's lots of questions about Dallas, but roster wise, I think they're one of the better rosters in the NFL, and I think that if they can get Aldon Smith, who hasn't played for 5 years. We talked about Colin Kaepernick being out of the league for 4 years and not being able to do anything. Well, Aldon Smith's been out for 5, and now he's back, and he's still south of 30. And will he be able to be that presence that Dallas has been looking for on the opposite side of DeMarcus Lawrence?
It's just getting him. I mean, you're not going to be looking for a lot from him. You're just going to be looking for him to be almost coming as a rotational player. Because you can't count on him to keep his head screwed on.
I'm expecting them to get close to double-digit sacks.
Really? Okay.
I mean, you got to forget that Alden Smith was, such a talent when he came out. And I don't think anyone had more sacks in the 2 year period from his rookie year to when he fell off the radar than him. He is, he's the type of player that they need to put opposite DeMarcus Lawrence and really cause problems. And in that division, when offensive line is going to be a question for every single team, and they've got and I mean, we're going to have Gerald McCoy, obviously. They've had to kind of waive him, put him on injured reserve because of that injury he suffered in training camp. And they're looking to, put Dontari Poe in there as well. All serviceable players, but I mean, they're really deep on the defensive line to me if they're all playing to their potential. And so it's really going to be on Mike Nolan to make sure that they can get that going.
Let's segue on. I want to focus on the two bottom teams before we come back to Philly. Let's look at Washington next. Ron Rivera's come in. He's unfortunately had to go off recently just for chemotherapy. He has a treatable form of cancer, but we wish him well and a speedy recovery. They've had a lot of change during the off-season. Obviously, the name, trying to change the culture. It is a rebuilding project, I think. For me this year, I think Washington will be the worst team in the NFL record-wise.
I think it's probably, well, another team we're going to talk about might be there. So I agree.
Yeah, I think it's between two of them. But
yeah, I think it's going to be sub-5 wins, certainly.
I just don't think Haskins is the answer, and I think they move on from him.
Right. Okay. Why do you say that? Okay.
I don't think he showed enough.
Because we're talking about sample size, right? Yeah, we're just talking about sample size, and you're talking about those few games that you started last year, and I think a terrible team with Bill Callahan taking the reins after Jay Gruden was fired. And of course, there's difficulty in the fact that Jay Gruden never wanted Dwayne Haskins. So it's very, very difficult to be brought into an organization where the head coach doesn't want you. And then Kevin O'Connell, who, is an okay offensive mind, but I don't think he would set the world on fire. And you're dealing with a very small sample size in that very bad situation. So I'm not going to, totally slate Dwayne Haskins. He's got an arm, he's got the traits, he's got the ability. Whether or not he shows that in a first full season where he gets all the snaps is going to be important to be able to projecting him later on. And I don't, they brought Kyle Allen in, who Ron Rivera knew from Carolina, to back him up, and he was a starter last year and was middle to below average, but Dwayne Haskins will be aware that if he doesn't play well, then they will bring Kyle Allen in to manage the ship. So I'm not going to throw Dwayne Haskins under the bus just yet.
I just think some of his decision making was a little bit poor. What you're saying about sample size is the same thing that happened to Josh Rosen. I think they're going to be bad this year. They could be in a position to get Lawrence or Fields. Lawrence or Fields either are better quarterbacks than Haskins, and I think if you're in that position, you take Lawrence or Fields. If you're one or two, you're moving on from Haskins.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you're talking about putting the cart before the horse. Okay, you're talking about how you're just looking at the roster just now, saying they're going to be terrible and that they should be in the hunt for Lawrence or Fields or whatever. What if he wins? What if he wins 4 out of the first 6 games? Do you then say, actually, he's okay, he's not that great, but we really want? I mean, it's nonsense. If he's terrible and loses the first 6 games, then yeah, get Kyle Allen and manage the rest of the season, and then you can be in that conversation. But you've expended a first-round pick on a guy that hasn't been given a fair shake of the stick. Give him a full off-season. Get him into your team. The difficulty is that their skill positions aren't that great, other than Terry McLaurin. So where are you actually going to be halfway through the season? If it's going to be Dwayne Haskins has won 6 games halfway through the season, how can you then say he's not the person?
I mean, if he comes out and wins 6 games and then he proves me wrong, then fair enough, you stick with him, you ride it out. But I just don't see it in him.
Again, I think it's really. I mean, you're right. It is part of the Josh Rosen syndrome. Okay, but young quarterbacks on terrible teams they need to be given time. And the difficulty is that we look at Patrick Mahomes, okay? He got to sit a full season, and then he comes in and is the best player in the last 20 years in the NFL. You rush young quarterbacks into playing on bad football teams, and it has a demonstrably negative effect going forward. And you can go back for the last 20 years and see all the first round quarterbacks that probably maybe 5% of those taken in the first round that had to play straight away actually have success going after 5 years. So I'm coming off as some sort of strange Dwayne Haskins defender here, but again, we preach about putting people in a situation to succeed, and at the moment, I think you're being overly negative about a guy that hasn't had a fair shake of the stick yet.
Possibly. I didn't like the pick at the time. I thought, I'm always very wary of taking a quarterback who's only been a 1-year starter, and it's also why I have slight reservations over Justin Fields. Granted, this would have been his year 2. I just think with no college season this year, you have to have some doubts about Fields, if that makes sense, because you've not had those 2 years worth of tape on him. Haskins, I think you could put some of it on his success on the Ohio State system, and then we all know he was drafted there because he went to high school with Dan Snyder's son, and the Snyders were really close with him.
Okay, again, that just might be a familiarity with him, but I'm not going to say that Dwayne Haskins was picked in the first round to be an NFL starting quarterback because Dan Snyder knows his son. So it's like Dan Snyder's son knows him. That's too far a stretch from me. I'm sorry.
I think he was a low-end first-round pick, and there was a reach, and I think at best he was a low-end first-round talent. And there was
are you going to turn around and say like Daniel Jones?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Looking forward to that. Okay.
No, anyway. I'm going to say no. I don't like Daniel Jones. I'm just saying I thought you meant like Daniel Jones. I would say yeah, they're like similar in that they were reaches.
Okay.
That's my opinion. So it'll be interesting to see how this season shakes out.
I mean, the thing is, they obviously took Chase Young second overall, and that defensive line is arguably one of the best in all the 8 teams that we're going to talk about. I think it has 3 first-round picks on it, essentially. Montez Sweat, Jonathan Allen, and now Chase Young. So, I mean, they're going to be a handful for whoever they deal with. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that defensive line is able to, they should be dominating with that kind of 3 out of 4. And I mean, Daron Payne's no slouch either, opposite Jonathan Allen. So it's the rest of the secondary it's the rest of the defense that's a bit of a question. But that defensive line, I'm going to be really interested to see how they're able to get after quarterbacks in this division.
Right, let's move on. Giants next. Obviously, we've got a new coach in Joe Judge. He's making the coaches and the players do laps for every mistake. I think this could be a rough year for them. It is quite a tough schedule that they've got, certainly to open up. So, what is your thinking for the Giants this year?
Again, offensive line's bad, and it's going to be how the coaching staff is able to, really kind of take this roster and use that favourite phrase of mine that I stole from Herm Edwards from Hard Knocks all those years ago: make chicken salad out of chicken shit, because it's not good. The thing about Joe Judge being a young, head football coach, not done it before, all that kind of stuff, he's brought Jason Garrett in as the offensive coordinator. We've got to remember that, when there was all those, rumours about how the fact that this was going to be Garrett's last year in Dallas last year, all of a sudden these articles were being mentioned, said, oh, well, if Garrett is let go from Dallas, then he's going to be a candidate for the head coaching job in New York. And everybody kind of scoffed a bit and realised that, it was, a publicist's kind of wet dream, just basically trying to put that out there to make sure that there was some sort of public relations angle that Garrett could be able to kind of leverage against the Cowboys, but nobody believed it. And you got to understand that when a young coach comes in and makes this kind of appointment, you think, well, that's wise, that's clever. Nobody's saying that. Okay, when McVay was made the head coach of the Rams, he brought in Wade Phillips, and everyone said that's really clever. Good football coach, being a head coach, able to guide him, all that kind of stuff. No one's saying that about Jason Garrett. Everybody's scared as shit that the fact that Jason Garrett hasn't actually coordinated an offense in 15 years. And even when he did, it was, again, 20 years old. And that's going to be a theme of the New York Giants, I think. They're going to be playing early 2000s football in 2020, and it's not going to work because their defense is also set up to be an early 2000s defense. There's no pass rush. Their linebackers are not athletic. And the only real positive that they really have in the secondary is their second-round draft pick, Xavier McKinney. So you think that, Washington are going to be in for the number one pick. I'm going to go with, both New York teams. I think both the Giants and the Jets are going to be right down there at the bottom.
I mean, if you look at that coaching staff that Joe Judge has surrounded himself with, you've got Jason Garrett, Freddie Kitchens, Derek Dooley, Brett Bielema. It's interesting.
That's not a barbecue I'd want to go to.
Yeah.
Rather watch paint dry, quite frankly. That's very, very unfair because obviously I don't know them at all. But certainly from their public personas, they don't exactly seem the most charismatic bunch. Patrick Graham is also, a difficulty for me because obviously he has, some time with the Giants. I'm sorry, Patrick Graham's the new assistant head coach, defensive coordinator, who was the defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins last year. And he is, again, from the Patriots. He spent some time in New York, but statistically, he's not done well as a defensive coordinator. It's all come pretty quick for him as well. I think Miami gave up touchdowns on their opponents' red zone visits 62% of the time, which is not good. And to New York with that roster of defensive talent, I'm not expecting much more. So it's going to be a difficult time. I mean, Dave Gettleman, has his philosophy and he's sticking to it. God bless him. But again, I think they're playing early 2000s or early 2000 football in 2020, and that's not going to work.
Yeah, I think it's interesting.
Interesting's code for bad. Is that right?
Yeah, basically. Interesting's code for I will not be watching a single snap of the Giants because I don't have any of their players on my fantasy team either. So it's sometimes I think it's a little bit harsh for these new coaches when they come in, because when you're a brand new coach, you're going to make mistakes because you've never been in this position before. You're kind of learning on the job. And New York's a very unforgiving place for you to be making those type of mistakes. So I do just think it's quite a difficult situation for him. And the first 5 weeks of the season are pretty brutal. You start with the Steelers, then you've got the Bears, then San Francisco, then the Rams, then the Cowboys. So it's a tough situation for them, and it's one I'll be quite interested in watching. Well, I won't be watching, but just keep an eye on because it's just what happens at the end of the season. Like, do they get rid of Gettleman after this season, or
I think if
another GM and then he's a lame duck, he's a lame duck head coach?
No, I think they're picking. I think they're picking top 5 again this year, and I think Gettleman will be out. The Giants used to do well of promoting from within and being an organisation that invested in people that they had, and the difficulty is that I expect that they might not be able to do that again. But you're right. Sometimes that disconnect between bringing in a coach, hiring a new GM, and then the head coach isn't the GM's guy, but it can be a bit difficult, especially when he's kind of young and unproven. You certainly don't want to wish anybody to be one and done. And it's not unimaginable that can happen. It happened in Arizona. So I just look at this roster and think, you're going to need a Daniel Jones to be the 6th pick in the draft. You're going to have to need him to be so much better than he was. He has to stop fumbling the ball. He has to, be able to take a grasp of Jason Garrett's offense and be able to execute it expertly for them to have a chance to do anything in the division, never mind the league. So there's been a little bit of love for Daniel Jones on football Twitter very recently, saying that they like some stuff. I think it's a bit isolated. I think it's cherry picking. I think it's one of these things that people do in the off season, trying to generate conflict and conversation and clicks. So if he was staying in some sort of same offensive system, that'd be fine. But we've talked about it many, many times before. Young quarterbacks constantly changing offensive system. It's not really conducive to positive, progressive football. So we'll see what happens. But I just think that the Giants overall are going to really, really struggle this year.
I also think he's got the added pressure in that, no matter what you think of Eli Manning, with the Giants fan base, he is very much loved. And I think stepping into those shoes, they're big shoes to fill. So I think Daniel Jones needs to get used to a lot of scrutiny on what he does this year. And I think every misstep will be blown up. Good, whether that's good or bad or not, it's just unfortunately what comes with being the quarterback of one of the New York teams.
Right, who throws more touchdowns, Daniel Jones or Dwayne Haskins? Presuming they start the same amount of games, who throws more?
I would say Daniel Jones.
Okay, I'm going to go Dwayne Haskins.
Okay.
And not just to be contrary, I'm more of a Dwayne Haskins guy than I'm a Daniel Jones guy, and I know that's trust me, I wouldn't take either of them if I had an actual choice of probably a third, but I just think it's going to be difficult, and until Jason Garrett shows us that he can do anything with an offense in 2020, I'm going to go with Dwayne Haskins.
There's going to be a lot of swing passes to Barkley, which will get me that bet.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on. Philadelphia Eagles. Topped the division last year. Off-season, taking Jalen Hurts in the second round. Some thought that was a bit weird.
We thought it was weird. Don't say some. We thought it was weird.
Yeah, we did think it was weird. I get it, because Wentz is always hurt. So you need to have a competent backup. But even taking him in the second round was odd. They had a lot of injuries to the wide receivers last year that you like to think that won't happen again.
Can we peddle out the stat that everyone talks about Carson Wentz last year, and that he threw 4,000 yards but didn't have a single 500-yard receiver, even though one was like 506 yards. But just get that out of the way, because it's the only thing that anyone talks about Carson Wentz just now.
The thing is, when we're discussing this, we have to be very careful not to criticise Carson Wentz, because the Philadelphia fans do not like that at all. You cannot say that he is a fake elite quarterback, and that MVP caliber season was an aberration. You're not allowed to say those things. Not that I'm saying them. I'm just saying we shouldn't say them.
Well, first thing about Carson Wentz is that he needs to stay healthy. Okay, if he does that, then we can start talking about whether or not his play was an aberration or not. Until he stays healthy, nobody will be able to have that conversation for real. The other difficulty is that he doesn't seem to be all that liked by certain members of his own side of the ball, because there's a constant I am Spartacus of leaks being made to the Philadelphia media criticizing him, but then no one ever taking responsibility for who did it, even though Alshon Jeffrey seems to have been the main culprit.
Yeah, it's quite a strange one. It was even when Nick Foles came in, Chris Long had that shrine set up to Nick Foles, and that was made into a thing, and everybody was like, "Well, what's going on with does that mean you don't like Carson Wentz, or what's going on there?" It's a very strange situation.
I think to clarify as well, we're not saying that Carson Wentz is a dick. If anything, we're saying he's almost too nice. Is that fair enough to say?
I think what we're saying is that Carson Wentz is there's maybe a culture clash there.
The difficulty with Carson Wentz is that he's maybe a bit of a summer camp counselor. say,
Yeah,
take that how you will. Certainly not getting into any of his, other characteristics. He has the tools, he has the ability. That's fine. But they lost Brandon Brooks, which was a big loss for him, which meant that they had to bring Jason Peters back in. So again, questions on the offensive line. They're not all that enamored with Andre Dillard. Dillard's play, but I don't think they want to stick Jason Peters back out there to demoralise him about it. So the Philly are basically going to be does Miles Sanders become the running back that everybody thinks he is, and certainly fantasy owners hope that he does. But they're just I don't know where I am on the Eagles. I'm going to sit on the fence.
and they're a very weird team, and it's hard to get a kind of read on where they are. I also think their schedules, it's going to be a really good test of them. I think if you look at their first 8 games before the bye, they've got Washington, then the Rams, then Bengals, then a tough stretch of San Francisco, Steelers, Ravens, then the Giants, and then the Cowboys, and then they've got their bye. Mm-hmm. So that's quite it's a fairly balanced one, but it's one that you could go, like, you could be 4-4, or you could be like, it's really hard to get a read on them, like you say.
I think one thing that we might want to try and keep in mind when we're talking about the Philadelphia Eagles is, is their previous performance, and is all liking how they won the Super Bowl the way they did, and wanting to say that that's the team that they are in 2020. I'm not sure it is. If you look at their skill players, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside hasn't really lived up to the second round hype. Alshon Jeffrey, as good as he can be, it has a difficulty staying healthy. Same about Deshaun Jackson. They've drafted Jalen Reagor, and after that it gets pretty thin. Zach Ertz is, probably on the way out as well, I would say. So it's really difficult to be so confident about their skill players to say that their offense is going to be at a level which is going to win the division by 10 wins or so, having only just won it with all the injuries with 9 wins last year, and Dallas Cowboys team that were intent on sabotaging themselves. If you look at the defensive line, though, Derek Barnett, Fletcher Cox, Vinnie Curry's back, Brandon Graham, and Malik Jackson, that's pretty damn solid as far as I'm concerned. And so, the defensive lines of this division, Dallas, Washington, Philadelphia, we could be having a look at saying, how do those defensive lines play in division games? How do they get after the quarterbacks of the division opponents? And is that going to be, the key to how these games play out? And I think that's something that I'm going to look at for the NFC East, for this season, the defensive lines of those 3 teams and how they affect the division games.
So how do you see the division finishing up?
Well, I've just said Dallas for the NFC Championship, so they could get in their wild card, but you want Dallas. If you're saying that, you want Dallas to be winning the division by 10 games. So I'm going to go Dallas, Philly, Washington, New York.
I think it's going to be Philly, Dallas, New York, Washington, same as last year.
I think that's the first time we've properly diverged on our thoughts in relation to a division.
I'm not 100%. I think Dallas have the best players in the division. Like, they have the most talent, the most skill.
Oh, they have the best roster by far. They have the best roster by far.
But it's just, my question is Mike McCarthy.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the CEO approach is something that works for him in Dallas, because it didn't work for him in Green Bay.
Let's move over to the AFC East. Patriots won the division last year, 12-4. Bills were 10-6. Jets were 7-9, and the Dolphins were 5-11. Let's start with Miami for this one. Drafted Tua. We obviously don't know when he's going to play at all. I think it's Fitzpatrick's going to be the starter on this. I really like what they did last year. I know they were 5-11, but I thought Flores did a fantastic job as a coach, getting players to buy in. Bear in mind how the season started with that absolute demolition by Baltimore. I just thought he showed that he is a great coach, because he kept that team locked in for that entire season, even though there was all this noise about tanking for Tua and everything. They did eventually get him. I I'm just really excited to see how the Dolphins turn out this year. I don't think the record will be spectacular, but I'm really excited about Brian Flores as a coach and that organisation.
Yeah. Okay, stock answer, as I have done for every single team. Bad offensive line. It's going to be interesting to see how the coaching staff does it. How that relates to Miami is that they've brought Chan Gailey in from the wilderness. I mean, I don't know what he was doing, but I mean, he's not been in the NFL for 4 years, and he's come back. He has a little bit of a link with Miami, as he was their OC when they went 11-5 back-to-back years in 2000, 2001. But again, he's not a name that you would instantly think of, new age NFL football and being there. He's coached Fitzpatrick at 2 stops at the Jets and the Bills, and so there's a familiarity level there. So I think that Fitzpatrick will be the starter. It's already been said in training camp that he's most probably the starter. Actually, quick side note and very, very brief story, because I know we're trying to be a little bit quick today, but the Dolphins are famed for turning Drew Brees down because of a shoulder injury when he left San Diego. But it turns out actually that Chan Gailey, when he was there, was asked about his opinion on Drew Brees when he was coming out in the draft, and he told the Dolphins hierarchy not to draft him because he was too short to be successful. So that's twice that Miami have turned down Drew Brees, and again, it's one of the great what ifs that I think Dave Damashek did previously as to what would happen if Drew Brees had went to Miami. But anyway, they are where they are. I want to be positive about the Dolphins. And I think the reason that we like the Dolphins is because, yes, okay, they only won 5 games, but I think we like the way that they played football. And you're right, that is a lot to go with how Brian Flores put his team together and kept them on track. They've added a number of interesting additions, mainly on the defensive side to solidify that kind of Brian Flores culture and the way they want to play defense. But it's how Chan Gailey is able to make up for a below average offensive line, and they've also had 2 opt-outs in Alan Hearns and Albert Wilson, who I'm pretty sure they would prefer to have rather than the cast of characters at receiver that they've got just now. So I'm just slightly less positive than you are, because I want to see what Chan Gailey does and how his offense translates this year with Fitzpatrick.
I think we all know that this year Miami, it's like another bridge year. It's not a tank year, it's like a bridge year before Tua comes in for his full run. So we're in year 2 of the rebuild. Year 3, like 2021, I think, is when everything will kick into gear. But I just want to see it might not even be in the wins. They might win less than 5 this year. But I just want to see some type of progression, whether it be improved play on the defense, like year 2 of Flores' system, or if it's in some other aspect that we can actually say, look, there has been progress there, because I think he's building the culture. I'm not saying they're going to beat 5 wins. I just think they're a good organization to keep an eye on. And I think 2021 is the year when it could all come to a head for them.
Yeah, so last week we talked about how the Panthers had were below the stage of rebuild, and they were just starting from scratch essentially and going forward on that basis, and that I said that they'd be happy to get 5 wins. Dave disagrees with me, saying that nobody in the NFL would be happy just with 5 wins. The Dolphins last year exceeded expectation with 5 wins, and I think you're right. They would hope to at least get that many again this year, because as much as Fitzpatrick's fun, and if you are going to have a bridge quarterback, I don't think there's anybody better than Ryan Fitzpatrick, just because he's so fun to watch. But they do have Tua in the wings, and they're desperate to make sure that everybody knows that he's back fit in training camp, and it was an absolute coup that they managed to get him in the draft. But how I wouldn't want to put Tua back there with this offensive line.
Yeah.
And so I would hope, given that they picked up Matt Breida and they've still got Devontae Parker, if you look at I'll just tell people rather than listing off the names, go look at who Miami has on their roster just now in respect of wide receivers, and other than Devontae Parker, you would not say that any of them, if they were on any other team, would be guaranteed to make the final 53.
I think their upside here is 8 wins. Like,
I still think that's a bit too much.
No, like that's just like if everything was clicking and like they nailed everything this season, they could come away with 8 wins, and that's by beating the Jags, the Broncos, the Cardinals, the Jets twice, the Bengals, and the Raiders. That would get you your 8 wins, but
They're not beating the Raiders.
I don't think they're going to get. If I was to put a ceiling on them, I would say their absolute maximum ceiling is 8 wins.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at both sides of the ball, you would have to say that there's more positivity about the defensive side of the ball, and that just talent-wise, it's there. I still don't see an actual pass rusher that you can rely on. Maybe someone will elevate themselves and bust out this year, but if you're going on past performance and on paper, you can't see where they're actually getting much pass rush from. So that's the real difficulty, and they've added bits and pieces on the defensive side. Noah Igbenogany in the draft, Byron Jones in free agency, Kyle Van Noy in free agency, but there's still no pass rush as far as I'm concerned. So it's going to be a difficult time, and I think if they get 5 wins again, I think that would be I would say they're probably around about 5 wins.
Okay, let's move on to the Jets.
No wins apparently. No wins apparently.
I think another contender for one of the worst teams in the NFL. I think they'll be picking top 5. I just think Gase is awful. And he's been dining out on that one season he had with Manning for forever. It's on to Miami. It's seen him to here. Darnold, is he going to make a leap? Le'Veon Bell had one of his worst years ever behind the Jets. Again, I know what you're going to say. Bad offensive line. I don't see where they got better.
Yeah, well, when we were talking about them in relation to the draft, we said that they needed to address offensive line, and they needed to address wide receiver, and they did that with the first couple of picks. Mekhi Becton comes in raw as hell, but certainly there. But again, you're adding him to a group which is so below average. I mean, George Fant is probably going to be a starter for them, and again, that didn't really work out for the Seahawks. So I don't really see how their offensive line is going to be able to protect or be able to give Le'Veon Bell any assistance in the run game. Now they've got Frank Gore there, who will somehow manage to grind out 600 yards for you, but it's a really, really difficult one to see how Adam Gase, with the past performance he has from Miami to the last year in New York, how he's going to be able to get them to get points on the board and get wins. Again, I was looking at the roster and thinking, well, if Sam Darnold goes down, are we going to have another Luke Falk situation? And I was looking at the active roster and I was thinking, well, there's David Fales, James Morgan, who's a draft pick this year, and Mike White. Well, I mean, what are they going to do? And just as an aside, we said that last week for Tennessee, and they promptly went and signed Trevor Siemian, making my point absolutely null and void. So they've now finally got back up. But I then looked at the reserve lists, and I forgot that Joe Flacco is on this team.
Yes.
If Sam Darnold isn't doing it for you, it's not going to go well. You don't have anyone to kind of turn to say, get us out this hole. They just have got such a dearth of cohesiveness and talent that we derided somebody for saying they're going to get 0 wins. But you know how many teams have had 0 wins, since 1978? 2.
Yeah.
So the Cleveland Browns in 2017 and the Lions in 2008. So
they'll win one.
So they're going to get a win here or there.
Yeah.
And I'm just, saying they're going to get absolutely none is a really, really big bold take, and fair play to anyone that wants it. But, they're going to get 1 or 2 wins, I think, but I can't see them getting much more than that.
No, I think you're right. I think they're the bottom of the division. I think they're contending with Washington in my eyes as for the number 1 pick this year.
if again, bad offensive line comes down to coaching, and for this one, it's on the offensive side of the ball. Greg Williams will do what Greg Williams does with average defenses. He'll make them just above average, and everyone will, he'll win a game with them. The Jets will probably, if they are going to win multiple games, it's probably going to come off the back of some sort of defensive led resurgence in a game with a turnover or pick six or something like that, because Greg Williams will be able to dial up pressure in a way which will get them that sort of result. But as much as I love Braxton Berrios, I don't think he's going to be the slot guy for them. And Denzel Mims again, I think will be ruined by Adam Gase, which is a shame. And you're at the moment relying on Brashard Perryman to be your number one receiver, who I've had positive things to say about him since he left Baltimore, because he was a bit injured in Baltimore and he did well in Cleveland and Tampa. But again, there's just a dearth of playmakers that you would willingly say are going to get you lots of points.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens with that, but I just think this is going to be a real struggle for the Jets this year. Okay, let's move on to the Buffalo Bills. They finished 10-6 last year, didn't make the playoffs. They've made some moves this year. They've added in Stephon Diggs from the Vikings. It seems to be that this is the year that they're really going all in on Josh Allen to try and find out exactly what they have in him. At the start of the year, the start of this offseason after Tom Brady left, they were also kind of being put forward as dark horses to win this division. Dan, what are your thoughts on this?
Don't think they're dark horses. I think given the turnover in the division and the other teams, they should be the favourites given their stability and their previous showings. Sean McDermott has done a very, very good job there of, whilst creating quite a bland team, a very, very efficient team. And if they had a bit more of a dynamic playmaker at quarterback, then I think they would be heavily in the conversation for pushing deep into the playoffs. But as it is, they've got Josh Allen, and he's still got a lot of question marks that we've covered many times before. So they should win the division. With the roster, their stability, and who they've got coaching them, they should be winning the division.
I think if you look at their first 4 games, they start at the Jets, then the Dolphins, then the Rams, and then the Raiders. I think you could make the argument that they could be 3-1 or even 4-0 going into Week 5 against the Titans. So I think they've got the opportunity to have quite a good start to the season. But like you say, we've talked about Josh Allen on numerous occasions. I'm not overly sold on him. I think you had the questions when he was coming out. There wasn't really the production in college. His accuracy needs to improve significantly. And really what he's got going for him is that athleticism to go with the big arm. But maybe with Stephon Diggs that will help him. But I don't really see Stephon Diggs as a vertical wide receiver threat. I see him more in the Odell Beckham role of, give him some slants and let him get, yards after catch and, breaking in routes, not really that running down the sideline type of route. I don't know if you agree with that at all.
I do to a point. He can win vertically, but you're probably expecting John Brown to clear everything out deep and then have Diggs work underneath on the intermediates. And when we focused on Josh Allen in the game that we looked at him, I said that he makes really, really good fastballs in the intermediate range, and then his accuracy just falls off a cliff the minute it goes out, over 20 yards, and he has to have that touch on the ball and arc it in over a receiver or DB's shoulder. But Stephon Diggs, John Brown, Cole Beasley, they're probably starting 3 wide receivers, and thereafter, it's a kind of a bit of a no man's land in relation to who's the 4th receiver, and they're Dawson Knox needs to take a significant step up, in my opinion, to be able to, allow them to run any sort of tight end sets. They got Tyler Croft in from the Bengals, but he might push Knox a little bit more, but you would expect Knox to be the kind of young guy that they want to get the ball to a little bit. So it really, really depends how they're going to distribute the ball. And are they going to be what they were last year,
I,
which was good
I'm,
defense based on a run game, with a cast of characters, and then see if they can get Josh Allen, a little bit more dynamic.
yeah, I just think that when you look at his passing charts, you can get them from Next Gen Stats, NFL Next Gen Stats. That's a website I really, really rate. It's basically giving you a lot of the stuff that you get from PFF, but you don't have to pay for it. There is nowhere that there's like 3 areas that he really excels in, but everything else he's just average or like below average, and it's not really what you expect for a quarterback going into like what last year was his second year. There was some improvement, but he's not shown me enough yet.
Right, well, you're talking about Josh Allen's charts. Some people can't see
Yeah.
the charts, including me. What are the areas that he's good in?
Let me just. So he is good on the hashes, 10 yards plus, and on the left hash, 5 yard, within the first 10 yards. Let me just share this with you so you can see it. But it's, his deep ball, which was one of the big reasons for even drafting him in the first place. That's an area of concern for him. He can't hit it between the numbers deep. He's got quite an atrocious rating there. It's he's just got a lot of areas that he needs to improve on.
I would encourage people to go back and have a listen to our Bills podcast, because we do go into depth into what Josh Allen does well, what he doesn't, and we give specific examples. But again, they need him to be the driving force of the offense, and not rely on a good defense and a run game if they want to make that push to a championship game. Even can you really see the Bills being able to push the Chiefs in any significant way?
No, I think the one thing that they would have going for them is potentially home field advantage. If you get into those later months and you're playing outdoors in Buffalo, that's a bit of a tough slog, especially if they can get that run game going. I think to get any type of success, and I'm going to be careful how I say this because I don't want to trigger you, Dan, but I think you need to use Josh Allen almost like how the Ravens use Lamar. I'm not saying that Josh Allen is anywhere close to the player that Lamar is as an athlete, or even as a passer. He's nowhere near as good as Lamar Jackson is as a passer. But I think you need to build that style of offense, if that makes sense, and utilize the athleticism that Josh Allen does have and the factors that he can add into the run game.
Okay, well, I'll take it a step back. Okay, now when we discussed Josh Allen, the reason we talked about why he was picked up by the Bills was that there's essentially a Carolina Panthers, old guard in there. Brandon Beane worked in Carolina, Sean McDermott worked in Carolina. They both have, those kind of, understandings of what a big athletic quarterback can do, because they were both there when Cam Newton was doing well. We'll come on to Cam Newton when we discuss the Patriots in a minute. And so I think that's actually what you're trying to see them recreate. They're trying to, get him in more power packages running the ball, certainly down near the goal line. And they're trying to, maybe utilize athleticism, but not have it as the main skill set, because he does have that arm, and they keep trying to put it down the field. And you would think that with that skill set, which is, a bigger arm than Cam Newton, but Newton has better touch, and that's saying something. When you're when you're saying that Cam Newton is a better touch passer than anyone, you've got a problem there. So this is the last year really for him to show that he can, take instruction, work on that deep ball, and really change how this offense is perceived throughout the league.
Yeah, I think actually Newton is the better analogy there, but I just don't think they've quite managed to do that yet. And I think that's the next evolution for this offense if they want to be successful. They maybe need to go to that 2015 style offense that Newton had. and maybe use Josh Allen a little bit more in the run game. Because I mean, the wild card game, he had 9 carries. It's just, and he was able to get 92 yards, but I just want to see a bit more from him.
I mean, the Bills lost that game though. I mean, you got to remember that. I remember watching and thinking that Brian Daboll's game plan was really, really clever, using a lot of horizontal motion and Allen in the run game. But then towards in the fourth quarter, I think Allen took a sack, trying to make a play happen, trying to be that dynamic playmaker, and he took a sack. It took him out of field goal range, and that just killed it for him. So. It's a lot for Josh Allen to show that he is the guy for the next 5+ years in Buffalo. So it'll be interesting to see, but they should win the division given the rest of the rosters and their schedule.
I'll come on to that, but yeah, I just think there's more to see from them this year, and I just want to see what step he takes this year. I think it's actually quite interesting this year, the development of the 2 quarterbacks, Allen and Darnold, and what we see happens. Because I mean, even today, reports have come out saying that the Jets' starting offense was beaten up by the backup defense in their scrimmage. And the reports from the Jets beat writers have just been laying into that entire offense. So I think in some ways, both these quarterbacks are at quite decisive years for them. Maybe there's less pressure on Allen than Darnold, but I think it's still, if they falter this year, I think there will be a bit more of a groundswell.
The way I see it going is that Allen will get his contract extension probably pushed through towards the middle of next year. In his and they'll then, Case will be fired. Joe Douglas will bring in his own coach. Darnold will get one last shot with somebody else, which is, not good for, not good pressure for someone, when they know that they're probably on their last, go around with the team. Because, I mean, in this division, with the way that it's panned out after 20 years of the Pats winning, now is the time to strike and, be the team to, go and get a division title. And the difficulty with the Jets, even though we're going back on them a little bit, is that they just have, they made the mistake 2 years ago with allowing Mike McCagnon to stay and do the draft and then hire Adam Gase and then got rid of the GM and brought in another GM. I mean, the way that they operated that 18-month period has just really, really killed their opportunity for growth over the last 2 years.
They have kind of messed it up. The Jets have jetsed it, essentially. But I'm just really, I think those 2 teams, or those 2 quarterbacks, are the 2 that I'm most interested in this division, just to see what happens with them. Let's move on to New England. Last year, won the division, got put out in the wildcard round by Tennessee. Tom Brady's left. They've brought in Cam Newton, and there was the question over, will it be Stidham, Hoyer, or Newton that starts for it? It seems to be pretty clear now that it is going to be Newton starting for them. The defense has been decimated with guys pulling out with using the COVID clause, which is fine. It is what it is. I think we all expect a down year for the Patriots. They're putting a lot of hope into Cam Newton now. I think we have spoken about Newton. I don't think we'll ever see 2015 Newton again. But it's interesting this is another one where I'm actually really interested to see how the Patriots develop, because I think how Josh McDaniels uses Newton is going to be very interesting, and it's another case of just being a coach that I want to watch to see how he changes his system to accommodate Newton, if that makes sense.
No, and I think Josh McDaniels is exactly the right person to go to. So we've always talked about fit. I do think it's a good fit, but the difficulty is that, when we talked about how Newton was in that period after his MVP season and who he ranked with, we're talking about he was at the level of Blake Bortles, Eli Manning, Joe Flacco. they're not quarterbacks that were having success over that period, and he was smack bang in the middle of those statistics and his production. I'm trying really not to pile on Newton, but until I see something which may be Josh McDaniels being able to scheme things up for him and get him productive, I'm always going to be of the opinion that this is going to be a down year for the Patriots because of the pullouts, because of the skill position talent that they have and the difficulties that they've got in somehow not being unwilling to pay players and always saying, well, we'll trust the process, we'll coach them up. That's worked in the past when you've had a Tom Brady back there and able to distribute the ball, but I don't see that happening this year, and I think they're going to come down to earth with a mighty bang.
Part of me still thinks that the Patriots are going to win this division.
No one could really fault you for that, because for the last 5 years, everyone said, no, this is the year. No, this is the year. No, this is the year that they don't win. And for the last 20 years, they've won it straight. So maybe I'm being, falling into that trap and being, a fool. But I mean, everyone's, the only videos I've seen from Patriots camp, to be fair, is of a undrafted free agent rookie called Jeff Thomas, who played for Miami. So I was interested in that. And then these ones that get tweeted out by everybody of Cam Newton dancing and having that kind of swag and arrogance about it. And if that's the best thing that they can show you about Cam Newton at practice, then I'm not too keen on it.
Yeah, I buy into that as well, but I think the Patriots have done what a lot of teams have done, and just locked down the reporting because it's so restricted. Like, you're not allowed to put out what plays are being used. You're not allowed to talk about what personnel, and generally you're not allowed to talk about the results of scrimmages. It's just the Jets won. They didn't put that ban in place, and everybody was just like, "This is a shit show." So.
I seen the Seahawks had done that. I didn't realize that the Patriots did that. Maybe it explains why there's been, it's been so guarded, and they don't want anything to get out.
Well, I mean, even the Bills sacked their own internal media person, or I don't know, radio host, because he had talked about personnel groupings. So he was released from his contract, and they've just had 3 or 4 of the marketing team resign in protest at it. So there's definitely, the NFL has decided to just become more clandestine during this period. But so what I was going to say, for me, there's potential optimism here. I felt that after 2015, Cam Newton was never really given all the tools to succeed in Carolina. Now, granted, his health was an issue, so you have to caveat all of that by saying health is an issue. I think Josh McDaniels coaching him will get the best out of him. N'Keal Harry last year didn't have a great year as a rookie wide receiver, but I think that is an incredibly difficult situation to come into as a rookie wide receiver, when you're going into an offense with Tom Brady that has evolved and is at such a high level that it probably takes you longer to bed it in. I think now, having Cam Newton here and possibly having Josh McDaniels reevaluate the entire offense, that could be a really good thing for Harry, and I think we could see him really burst out onto the scene. You've still got Endelman. I think Endelman's a great slot receiver and a good weapon for him to have. And I think the running backs that they have are pretty good. The defense is a big question, obviously, without all the pullouts. But when you've got Bill Belichick coaching that unit, I'd just never write them off. For me, I can see I've kind of talked myself into the Patriots to win this division, I'll be honest.
Right. The problem with N'Keal Harry is that he just can't get separation. didn't matter what game it was last year, and he only played in a handful, about 6 or 7 games, is that every single time the commentators were focusing on that, or there was a post-game analysis, it was that N'Keal Harry could not separate from any DB at the NFL level. And this is why people are scared of receivers that run 4.5. And that's why when you're looking at receivers coming into the NFL, you should really consider their route running rather than their athletic traits sometimes. So he's got good height and size, but the difficulty has been is that he's not been able to separate from NFL defenders. And if that's going to be the key, he only had, I just looked up here, he only had actually 12 receptions for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns in those 7 games. So, that's still pretty limited production for 7 games.
Yeah, I do agree. I don't know why. I'm just think he has the potential for a breakout year. I don't know if it's maybe just the way that they were using him last year, or however, just where they were putting him in the offense. I think there's potential here. I think the fact that you can use Cam in the run game, that can also create more separation for your wide receivers, because you've got more instances of DBs looking into the backfield, trying to figure out what exactly the quarterback's doing. But I just think, I'm just very bullish on the Patriots this year. Maybe N'Keal Harry isn't the answer, but I do think that this is going to be a team to watch.
I'll focus on their defense, you focus on their offense, and then we'll see where we are after about 4 weeks in the season. Maybe we'll have a look at one of the games and see what they're doing, because it really is going to be a true test of Belichick's coaching ability to get, certainly the defense to the level it was last year with all these opt-outs.
Yeah, and I think as well, they start at the Dolphins week 1. That is going to be a tough game, because those Dolphins are going to come to play. Their first 5 games are Dolphins, then Seahawks, then Raiders, Chiefs, and then the Broncos, and then they have their bye in week 6. They could be 3-2, they could be 2-3. I think it's going to be a tough road for them this year, but I'm just really interested to see how this offense evolves from what it was last year.
Okay, the only benefit to the opening part of their schedule is that I can see that they're essentially at home for 4 of their first 6, but the 2 away games are at Seattle and at the Chiefs. So I think they are difficult games for them to, realistically get wins. And thereafter, I'm high on the Raiders. I know you're not. And we're both pretty high on the 49ers. I could see them coming out of that first 6-game stretch 2-4, only potentially getting wins against the Dolphins and the Broncos.
Yeah, like you say, I could see like a couple of different scenarios for it. It's just, I can totally see that happening. I don't see them beating the Chiefs, and I don't see them beating the Seahawks. I think the other 3 games are a toss-up. It is just such a tough season to predict for the Patriots, and I don't know why. I still stand by this notion that they're going to win the division, but I do just think it comes down to the coaching staff. I think having a great coaching staff can make such a big difference.
I mean, they've had turnover themselves in the coaching staff, but again, they kind of pick who they want. Nepotism be damned, or depending on who you're listening to. But the reason I focus on those 6 games and then talk about maybe the last 2 is that at that point they've only had 1 divisional game up until those first 6 games, and then they've got 2 back-to-back divisional games on the road against the Bills and the Jets, and then that's half the season over. So, yeah. So I'm touting Bills for potentially winning the division. I mean, there's a significant possibility that at the end of 8 games, they're certainly less than 500.
Well, I think even if you take that further, so say like we've gone over the first 5 weeks, they've got their bye week 6. If you look at weeks 7 through 10, you come off your bye, and you'd love to have a nice easy one to regroup from, but you've got San Francisco, Then you're playing the Bills, so that's 2 tough games. You've got the Jets, that's a second bye for you, and then you've got the Ravens. So from that stretch, you could see them realistically winning like 1 game out of those 4, or maybe winning 2.
Yeah, but it's also quite enjoyable to hear you say that you think you've talked yourself into the Patriots and then actually go through the games. And we've got them winning 3-4 games. So no, look, I don't like to go through the whole season and kind of do win-loss records too much, but I mean, we try and look at teams or rosters, how they're set up, the coaching staff, and then try and think, right, are they a 6, 7, 8 win team and such alike? Because there's so much variance. There's going to be injuries. There's going to be difficulties with the other teams. Some teams are going to be better than we think, and that's why I really kind of have a difficulty with strength of schedule and the turnover. But I think that you're being. It's not a hill to die on, but it's a small mound to die on to say that the Patriots are going to win the division.
Yeah, I don't know if it's looking through this. I think after week 10, the schedule gets a bit easier, so they can pick up games. But do you think they make the playoffs this year? No. You don't?
No.
See, if they don't win the division, I could still see them getting into the playoffs.
We shall agree to disagree.
9 wins. 9 wins should get you into the playoffs.
I think 9 wins is optimistic.
I think they could.
You have 9 wins, and I'm going to say that. I'm going to say 6.
Okay. So let's finish up with our game. How do we think the division finishes?
I mean, Bill. I'm going to say the Bills are going to win it, but by like 9-10 games, and thereafter it's going to be a pretty woeful division. I'm going to really stick my neck out. I'm going to say Miami Patriots and then the Jets.
Oof. That's,
and again, the thing is, but I do this to myself every single time. I talk about being optimistic, saying that if the Dolphins win 5 games again, they'd probably be happy. I'm picking the division with the Patriots, So no, I think there's momentum with the Dolphins. The Patriots have got too many questions for me. It all depends on how Newton fits in and Josh McDaniels works it. And again, we're relying on Newton to stay healthy. So, sorry, just before we go off the Patriots, if anybody that listens to this, and there's actually quite a few people listening to this, people might be surprised to know, if anybody can explain to me why Brian Lewerke wears number 68 when he's a quarterback, please let me know, because I have scoured Twitter and the internet to try and find this out, and nobody will be able to, and I can't find anything. But anyway, it all depends on whether Newton stays healthy for the Patriots. If not, we get back to Brian Hoyer, Jared Stidham, and potentially Brian Lewerke, which is not going to go well for them. So that's why they're there. And the Jets are, I promise I wouldn't say this, but the Jets are dumpster fire as far as I'm concerned.
I have another question for you, just based off your rankings. Do we see Tua this year for the Dolphins?
I hope not. I hope not for his development. I said when we talked about the Dolphins that it's a bad offensive line. I think they'll probably get a look at him later in the season, but I think Fitzpatrick will certainly start more games than Tua.
So my rankings, I'm going to go Patriots, Bills, Dolphins, Jets to finish the division. I've backed the Patriots so far, so I need to just stick with it.
I'm not sure where you are after that discussion on the Patriots.
I've got to. Look, it's not based on logic at all. It's not based on logic. It's not based on reasonable. All the things that we talk about, we don't want to be a hot take machine. We want to be, fact based and logical in our assessment of things. And I've just decided to go rogue with this Patriots take.
It's not coming. It's not coming from your heart. It's not coming from your head. I don't really want to say where I think it's coming from.
Yeah. Well, I'm prepared to be wrong on this.
I think you need to go have a lie down in a dark room.
Yeah, we do. Well, thanks everybody for listening to our season previews. We will be back next week, and keep your eyes and ears on our socials for more stuff. I'll be doing a stream on Sunday on Gridiron Hub. If you do like the show, review us, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps with Apple and Spotify's algorithms. Even if you're downloading it, give it a share on your own social feed. Try and get as many more listeners as possible, and bring them into the armchair QB's way of thinking. But
Wait, after that Patriots discussion, what is the armchair QB's way of thinking? Certainly you're thinking.
It's not based on logic just now. It's just we trust Bill. We believe in Bill.
The fundamental pillars of the armchair QBs out the window for one team.
Yes, pretty much. Fine. You can't do it for. I just can't go against Bill Belichick. He's got too much of a track record. Now watch them win one game and get Trevor Lawrence. It's going to be fun. But anyway, thanks very much for listening, and we will see you next week.